The New York Times just published an article called U.S. and States Say Facebook Illegally Crushed Competition. And it's about how 46 state attorneys general, plus the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, have joined a lawsuit against Facebook, accusing it of buying up its rivals to illegally squash competition and calling for those deals to be unwound, escalating regulators' battle against the biggest tech companies in a way that could remake the social media industry. So, those companies that Facebook, rival companies that Facebook has purchased are Instagram in 2012 for $1 billion and WhatsApp for $19 billion 2 years later, which of course eliminated competition that could have one day challenged the company's dominance, which of course is what the intent of those purchases was. In fact, um, there's a that's already a public record, emails that came up at a recent congressional hearing in which they grilled big tech, from Apple and Amazon to Google and, yes, Facebook. Uh, Facebook's CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, was grilled over private emails in which he divulged to company officials that, he viewed Instagram in particular as a threat, as a looming threat, and that's because of innovation, as the market shifted towards you know um, using the cameras on their phones and away from desktop devices. It was only natural and inevitable that Instagram, whose model obviously is predicated on pictures and videos and what have you, would be successful, and Facebook anticipated that and basically um, ultimately intervened by buying it out, and then did the same thing with WhatsApp in order to neutralize its growing success in the instant message market. So these things, this should not come. Uh, this should not come as a surprise, right? It seems obvious that if you're kneecapping all of your competitors and basically um, concentrating or putting all concentration of a market into one single corporation, that has a detrimental effect on society, not only on consumers and depriving consumers of choice, etc., but also, as I've talked about here, corporate, more corporate control of politics, more corporate control over workers' lives, and dominating and inconveniencing workers' freedoms and abilities to find other employment or, avoid abusive work environments or start rival businesses, etc. Obviously, pricing, this that can also affect consumer welfare. Although Facebook, in particularly, is modeled on selling ad space, so they can use the fact that they're not gouging anybody on the price. They can use that as a talking point to justify uh, their their corporate concentration, their own market concentration. But um, to 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 be clear, this represents a market shift in American antitrust and anti-monopoly enforcement. Um, that really is something that started in the 1980s or 1982 when, under the Reagan administration, he directed his Department of Justice Antitrust Division as well as his FTC not to enforce antitrust laws, basically to be really lax, it really hands off in treating companies that dominated, uh, um, that expanded market concentration above 10%, which uh, used to be strictly enforced. In fact, it's still technically illegal, and the Supreme Court and has interpreted it as much back in the 60s. Basically, you know, uh, interpreting uh, interpreting the values of previous antitrust laws to pass through Congress, such as the Sherman Act of 1890 or the Clayton Act of 1914. Uh, the FTC Act, which Section 5 gave empowered the Federal Trade Commission with the strict oversight of unfair methods of competition, which is basically, um, you know, according to and then according to the Supreme Court, which interpreted uh, the 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 definition of that power, um, the authority to establish rules of the marketplace, public values beyond simply those enshrined in the letter or encompassed in the spirit of the antitrust laws. So there you go. So it's something that basically there is strong legal precedent both through Congress and from the Supreme Court, dating from the turn of the 20th century at the beginning of the progressive era to the 1960s, that where suddenly we broke from, the judges did. And in the 1890s, the judges did, not so much the judges as just the the uh, the federal agencies uh, under presidential administration since Reagan. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has gotten away from enforcing that mandate. It used to be that since the 60s, that the courts, again, hewing closely to the intent, the spirit of the Clayton Act, which was concerned with antitrust more so than monopoly, that if you were a company that controlled 10% or more of a market, regardless of how large you were, or how efficient you were, because efficient is a sort of excuse that these monopolists would use to justify their dominant market position, was, oh no, but we're more efficient. And then when they would merge by buying out their rivals, that made them more efficient. So it was like a really circular logic. But it used to be that the courts interpreted, again, hewing closely to the intent of the Clayton Act, that if you had 10% of or more of a market, you were deemed you were illegal, and you were not allowed to merge. And now we're living in an era where obviously big tech, Facebook, Google. I think Google also was sued recently, by the way, as well. But Google, I think, controls 80% of the internet search market. Um, but basically, there were very clear lines that were previously drawn that used to be enforced. In deciding whether a merger was illegal, the court at the time looked to market shares and a history of rising market concentration. It refused to accept the argument that economies of scale and other quote unquote productive efficiencies justified mergers that would otherwise be illegal mergers. These rulings remain good law that have just been ignored for far too long. And so Amazon is one that Amazon has not been sued. Oh, so let me talk a little about the lawsuit. So in the case of Facebook, they're being charged with violation of antitrust laws, which is to say buying out rivals in order to have steady dominance of a market. You can't just buy out your rivals, and as Facebook has done, with the obvious intent of depriving consumers of choice. In the case of Google, Google was sued, I believe, 2 months ago in October over unfair exclusionary market practices, where they would basically pay um, handheld producers, phone producers, basically Apple, basically to install their search app as the default on their phone, thus obviously giving them a much larger platform, which they would pay for handsomely. And I believe it was a win-win for Apple, because that accounted for that 20%, 15-20% of their profits. I think upwards of like 15-18 billion dollar payments or something like that. Plus, obviously, Google gets to concentrate its control over the search market just by being the default app on the most popular selling phone. So you had all of that going on, and now basically they're being held to account. Google's being sued by dozens of cities and state jurisdictions, as well as a couple of red state attorneys general. And Amazon has not yet been sued, but was part of a recent hearing in July that also included Apple as well as Facebook and Google, in which they were grilled also. The thing with Amazon is a little different, although they have yet to be sued. We're talking about basically four of the largest, obviously, tech companies in the world. This obviously being the age of big tech, and when you consider the control, the power that these corporations have over our politics. The Silicon Valley, amongst the largest contributors, campaign contributors to the Democratic Party. That's a large beneficiary of Democratic Party politics. So for all these companies to come under the microscope like this, to come under scrutiny, marks a really heartening shift in in government policy and enforcement with respects to getting back to our roots on antitrust and monopoly, and cracking down on anti-competitive behavior. And that hearing, which was in July, in which all the big giants were brought into the room for one lengthy hearing, was really a great start. And now we're seeing the work that led to that. Number one, the investigative diligence, the homework that the Congress, that the Antitrust Committee, Senate Committee, or House Committee did, and building up to that. And now you're seeing what's coming from that, in the sense that now there's being actual actions, actual enforcement being brought out. And you know this is really positive. Again, you don't want to have these situations where corporations are able to control every aspect of a society. From labor, you have these non-compete provisions these large employers do, in which some 30 million American workers get into contracts, either knowingly or unknowingly, that prohibit them from being able to freely move from one employer to another, or to start a rival business. To say nothing of being inhibited from the freedom of being able to leave an abusive workplace, an abusive environment. I know Amazon, until 2015, until they were called out in 2015, they were engaged in these non-compete provisions, in which prohibited their workers from being able to find other employment for a period of 18 months after leaving Amazon. You can imagine, to say nothing of the abusive work conditions that those warehouse workers are infamously subjected to, from not being able to go to the bathroom and piss into a bucket, etc. But again, prices. Even though that doesn't apply so much to a company like Facebook, whose business model depends on selling ad space, you know, um, corporate control over our politics. Basically, corporate concentration is a real problem uh, for any society. It's unhealthy, it's dangerous, and it sets a really it sends a really strong message, a really positive message, uh, to see that our government officials, and this is a bipartisan effort, which is so rare, are seriously engaging in this issue of antitrust enforcement, which is something that we used to take very seriously until the 80s. Um, so to see this, really positive, and I'm definitely going to be keeping you guys posted on the latest in this story on Facebook and Google lawsuits. Obviously, they're gonna pony up. Both Google and Facebook have an army of lawyers and basically unlimited money to spend, unlimited resources to spend, and really long out, drawn out legal battles that potentially loom on the horizon. So this is going to be a story that's going to no doubt unfold over a long period of time. I'm going to be following this very closely because, again, we need to really seriously be reassessing corporate control over our lives and our politics and our jobs and our marketplaces, and making sure that we're not um, turning over basically our rights, our freedoms to these really large corporations that really basically lord over the society.